Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Skeptic Skeleton stream. Another late Skeptic Skeleton stream. Something came up yesterday, and I'm doing it today. So, yeah, that's what we're doing. Anyway, this week we'll be going over the middle ground, which, as far as I understand, is a program, show, thing that groups people from alternative perspectives together and asks them a series of questions in order to probe what each side thinks. And I thought it might be fun to through this to gain a little bit more insight on different things, as well as the air quotes non-feminist side. So let's get into it. Just for clarity's sake, if I had to pick a side, although I prefer not to, if I had to pick a side, I would be in the non-feminist category. So before anyone else takes a swing at this, I would say yes, but I would say that the feminist movement is like everything else. Every word has changed from most words have changed from their original definitions. I'm not necessarily convinced that's a good thing or a bad thing. It depends on what the change is that determines if the change is good or bad. But I think it's fairly obvious that the feminism movement today is not the same feminist movement that it originally was. And how can it possibly be after the changes that have been made? So I agree. I think that the feminist movement has changed from its original definition. However, I'm not convinced that that is a good or a bad thing. How can you tell who is most served by mainstream feminism, and what's the different types of feminism? How is mainstream feminism different from any other type of feminism? And why do you think that? I'm very curious as to how you arrived at that conclusion that a hyper specific demographic was most served by it. Before he gets into that, I do not particularly believe in the air quotes traditional definition of feminism, or I do not particularly agree with that definition, that being the equality of the sexes on social, political, and economic grounds. I believe in equality of the sexes on political grounds in the sense that everyone should have the exact same rights and legal protections. I'm 100% down for that. The social equality of the sexes is something that is idealistic but not particularly practical. I don't want a world where people are forced to be nice to everyone and everyone is forced to treat everyone equally. People should be allowed to be mean, people should be allowed to be jerks, people should be allowed to be assholes. And I will very much defend that freedom more than I will defend people's desire to be treated equally. Yes, you should be treated equally, but that doesn't mean that we should force people to treat you equally outside of some legal professional setting. As far as the economic equality of the sexes, again, that's idealistic, but I'm not quite sure that that is even a goal worth striving towards? Why must the outcome be equal? Why can't it just be the way that it is? If, for example, and I'm just running a hypothetical here, I'm not saying anything definitively, if women made more money than men, what's the problem with that? Why is that something that needs to be corrected? Especially if men and women share the same household, so it doesn't particularly matter who makes the most amount of money, everybody is sharing it because they're living together. So I'm not convinced that that's a problem. I'm not convinced that economic equality is a problem, except in the political sense of being prevented from making the same amount of money, or having some sort of discrimination prevent you from earning as much. That would be political to me, and that would be a political equality worth fighting for. So I'm not really for the social or the economic, but I'm very much for the political. So let's get back to this. I don't see this as a relevant objection to feminism. Regardless of what you call it, the main critique should be on what it is and what it does. If feminism were called egalitarianism, but operated the same, then the criticisms would be the same. So I don't think it's a valid criticism to target the title. I don't think the title matters. I think what it actually does is what matters. And this is a bit of a broad statement to try to say about feminism or feminists in general. Feminism is not just one thing. It is many different kinds of things. There are many different kinds of feminists with a lot of different kinds of beliefs. So it's very hard to say that they are all excluding men or that they are all ignoring men's issues. There are some that very much would disagree with that sentiment. So it's a very broad statement this guy is saying that I don't necessarily agree with. Just let me check chat for it. Let me check chat for a second. Oh, no audio on the video. Thank you, MathPig. So I was attempting to mute myself, and I thought if I muted myself, that would fix, because I was having audio issues last week, but I guess that's not working. So I guess we'll just have to try without muting and see how that works. But thank you for letting me know, MathPig. Thank you for giving me some sort of insight. That's why I check chat, because I don't know if other people can hear me. So let's get back to the video, and I apologize for any sound quality or echo issues. I'll do my best to fix that on my end.
Interesting. But the definition doesn't.
5 years ago, I lost all of my hair.
Male privilege is real.
Well, that depends entirely on how you define male privilege and what you define as a privilege to begin with. So this is a hard question that I can't answer right off the bat. I have to wait to hear what people's definitions of male privilege are and then see about those definitions. I don't have a general conception to work off of.
It's not lost on me how many more men are in academia and in higher education.
And how do you know that there are more men in academia and higher education? And even if that is in fact true, which I'm not willing to grant, but let's say I was, why is that a privilege? How is that a privilege? I'm not willing to grant that just there being more men in a given demographic or a given is necessarily a privilege, because that has nothing to do with any other men coming into that field. If I were a man, my chances of getting into higher academia and education have nothing to do with how many men are currently in that field. That neither favors me nor hinders me, because I would or should be accepted based on my abilities and my merits. Either you're implying that men are more likely to hire men, or I don't see what the problem with having more men in higher academia is. I also don't see what the problem would be if there were more women in higher academia. I don't see either as a problem that needs to be fixed or a privilege that is had.
Women are called more often to put their careers on hold.
By who? And even if you are called more often by these mystery people to do things, you do realize you don't have to do those things. Like, you can completely ignore those things. Again, society is such a vast variety of different things with a vast variety of different messages depending on which facets and cultures you look at. It's not really fair to say that some mystical force or some people out there are calling you to do something and you just have the power to ignore them. So what's the problem? Again, if they call you to put your careers on hold and you don't wanna, you don't have to. No one will lock you up. No one will come and harm you for it. You can choose to do whatever you want to do with your life. And the fact that other people might disagree with your choices is just the way that life is. So I don't see this, again, as a problem nor a privilege.
In order to have children or for whatever other reasons. That's just kind of the way I see it manifesting most in my life.
Now, this is very important, and this is going to be very harsh. I don't care how you see it manifest in your life, because at the end of the day, what I'm concerned about is the facts of the matter. This is why I don't ask a Christian how they see Jesus manifesting in their life. Well, sometimes I do because I need a good laugh. But how you personally see something is not necessarily the way that that thing is. I need something objective, or I need something that is not subject to your personal perspective, your personal anecdotes, because I can find someone like you whose experience is similar to yours, and then I can find someone else who has a completely opposite experience, and now I can't tell who to believe, because you say based on your experience this is how it is, and they say based on their experience you're wrong. Between two people who provided nothing but this is just the way that I see things.
It's just seeing how hard it is to be an intellectual woman in academia.
What does that mean? How do you rate the difficulty of being a woman in academia? How do you know if it's harder or more difficult? Just the fact that there are more men there, does that inherently make something more difficult based on the number of men there or the number of people of the opposite sex in a given field? I don't understand what this is meant to even mean. How do you know that it's harder, and what do you even mean by harder? Just give me a sec. Let me check chat. See if... Okay, nope, no update. Anyone who is in chat, if there are any audio issues, let me know and I will check back in between the questions.
My name is Faith, and I am not a feminist. I am a strong woman, and I was raised by strong women, but I cannot get behind a few of the core ideals of what it often means to be a feminist, so I do not identify as one.
My mother is a teacher. She has her master. She just has years and years of experience.
I feel it's necessary to point out everything that I just said about the previous one applies to this man as well, because he's going to give an anecdote of his mother and his mother's experience, which is really nice. But anyone else can come along and bring their own experience or their mother's experience that contradicts this, and again, we have no way to tell who is objectively correct. So I don't particularly care about your mom's experience, because then I have to care about everyone's mom's experience. And that leaves me without a way to tell who was actually correct versus who was actually incorrect. Or is everybody just correct because they have an experience?
And yet, her place within the school, her place within, as far as like authority over students, is not the same as a man.
And you can tell this how?
And I think that's an inequality that I've just been shown from my mother.
Did you go to the same school that your mother taught at? Did you see this for yourself, or is this something that your mother told you? Because this sounds eerily equivalent to people who think that they deserve a raise and consider it discrimination if they don't personally get a raise. And I don't understand I fail to see how that's a problem, is what I'm saying. Your mom is telling you her perspective of her experience at school. Cool. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's right, nor does it necessarily mean that she's wrong. It just means this is her individual experience, and I do not think it fair to take her experience and project it onto the larger question of male privilege just because she doesn't have male privilege in her opinion. Because again, all of this is coming from her telling you something.
Who comes home and says, I just had to work because I was uncomfortable the entire time. Or I had a strange experience with a male student who just would not listen to a word I said. It wasn't connecting. It wasn't until I brought in the vice principal who was male or another teacher who was male that things could be kind of squashed.
Okay, hold on. Let's go back for a second. I had to check chat. Thank you, Math Pig, for updating me. I know you're driving, you can't chat, but thank you for updating me on the audio thing. So I have to go back and re-listen to this. I apologize.
Just would not listen to a word I said.
Okay, so your mother had an experience with a male student who wouldn't listen to a word she said, therefore male privilege is real? Forgive me if I'm not quite seeing the connection that you're trying to imply here. It'd be different if you had made the case and sufficiently demonstrated that all women in that school had difficulty with male students, but just mentioning that your mother had difficulty with male students doesn't mean anything.
It wasn't connecting. It wasn't until I brought in the vice principal who was male or another teacher who was male that this could be kind of squashed and covered.
How do you know that it was because they were male rather than because they were more assertive or because they used a different approach than she did? This is literally looking at the only difference is gender, therefore gender is the primary factor, but that's not how things work. If you bring in a male principal or teacher or whomever and they squash the situation, that doesn't mean that they squashed the situation because they were male. That is an illogical inference. You have to demonstrate what they did to actually squash the situation, not just mention that they were men and the situation was squashed, therefore the situation was squashed because they were men. That is about as illogical as saying that you went to the bus stop and the bus showed up, therefore the bus showed up because you went to the bus stop, but that's not how that works again. So reasoning is a little bit flimsy here so far.
Just growing up, I would say that overall our school systems are more geared towards women.
Again, how do you know that? How do you test whether or not the school systems are geared towards women? What does it even mean for school systems to be geared towards women in the first place?
Or female teachers, and that's how our children are raised.
Are there more female teachers? Again, that's a thing that you said, but you haven't provided any evidence or citation, so I'm not just going to believe that. I'm not convinced that there are more female teachers just because some guy on YouTube said so. And this is what it sounds like I'm hung on this guy individually, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm trying to demonstrate how people in general often speak. And they often speak in a way where they just expect to be believed without actually substantiating the things that they say. Most people that I have personally encountered speak in a manner similar to most of the people here. They say things, they don't substantiate where they get this or where they heard it or how they know it's true. They just say things and they expect that other people believe them or they don't. And that is not a productive means of having a conversation, in my opinion. If you're going to say something as solid and concrete as there are more women teachers, clarify where, clarify how you know this, clarify what metric was used to determine this, and a myriad of other things. Explain what you mean rather than just saying what you mean and moving on. Because people who don't enter the conversation agreeing with you are not going to know if you're telling the truth or not, if you're being honest or not, or if you're just being accurate or inaccurate.
You know, the things that you really do, your mom has to deal with those difficulties that a man would not have to deal with.
Assuming that that is in fact the truth, again, no disrespect to anyone here, but I don't know you people, and for all I know, you could be lying, or your mom could have been lying to you, or a myriad of other different things that can interfere with my ability to assess the truth in this particular situation. I'm saying that to say it's more complicated than just person says things, okay, I believe you.
Men have to deal with with a lot of difficulties that most women wouldn't have to deal with. We do benefit from certain privileges, but so do women.
I would really like it if you demonstrated what privileges those were for each of the genders, please, and thank you for the rest of the class that doesn't already agree with you.
I think you considered it a privilege that there are more women in the teaching profession, but you should also consider that.
I don't know if he did consider that a privilege, but let's keep going.
Other options weren't necessarily or historically available to women.
This is an irrelevant point. This is a moot point. And the reason that I say this is a moot point, because if that is true, that these options were not historically available to women, that is unchangeable. There's nothing anyone can do about that. No one can change the history, as those are objective facts of the matter that can't be changed. Regardless of the current state of events now, what you have said historically will always be true. So even if we had 100% women representation in everything, women dominated every single field, you could still bring this point up. And that's what makes it irrelevant. It doesn't matter if there are 100% women. It doesn't matter if there are 100% men. It doesn't matter if there are 100% non-binary people. What matters is that in history, women didn't have these options. Therefore, what? So the point that I'm making ham-fistedly and all over the place is that history is not a relevant point to bring up in an argument about current events, because history doesn't change while current events do. It doesn't matter what the current state of events are, the history will always be what it is, so you could always bring up this historical argument, which makes it null and void.
Because they were considered to be more nurturing, a lot of women were pushed into that field.
But are they pushed into that field now? Because that is the relevant question that I think we're asking. I don't think we're asking, has there been historical privilege? I think we're asking, is there historical privilege right now? Or is there privilege right now? And not, is there historical privilege right now?
Women are choosing these majors and choosing their region of study, whereas men are tending to choose higher paying majors. They're choosing more to go into STEM fields and such like that.
Are they? Again, this is another claim that someone says to back up or substantiate. And as someone who's coming into the video as neutrally as possible, why should I believe you, random person? You say that these women are choosing their fields, and you say that the men are choosing higher paying fields, but where's your evidence? Where'd you hear that from? How do you know? Are you going to explain anything so someone else can do their own research, or are you just going to say things?
And reaping the financial benefits, while women are also reaping their own happiness benefits of going to a field that they enjoy.
Now, I will operate for a moment under that presumption that that is the state of affairs. Women tend to choose jobs that are not as high paying as men tend to choose more high paying jobs. In the hypothetical situation where that is true, because no one has demonstrated that, but in the hypothetical situation where that is true, neither side is particularly privileged because they are choosing their own paths. If women choose to go in a field that is less paying, knowing it is less paying, that is not a privilege nor a discrimination or a detriment. That's just a free choice. If men choose to go into a higher paying field that might not make them as happy or fulfilled, that is also not a privilege. That is a free choice. In the hypothetical situation where this individual was correct, again, I fail to see where the privilege is. No one has showed where or what privileges men have. They just allude to the fact that in some places there are more men and in some places there are less men. And neither one of those demonstrates a male privilege. Not to mention the random anecdotes about these things that happened one time. Give me a sec. Let me chat real quick. Okay, checking chat. And back to the video.
If I were born the opposite sex, my life would be easier.
Considering the fact that none of you know what sex are, that makes this question that much more fun to answer. But I don't see a conceivable way to test this. I don't see a conceivable way to prove this or demonstrate this. This is one of those the grass always looks greener on the other side kind of situations, where it's very easy to look at another person and presume, hey, they're in a relationship. My life would be so much easier if I had a partner to help me live and do stuff. But you don't actually know that, and you don't actually have a means to test that. You don't know what it would actually like to be a woman unless you transition. But even then, you wouldn't know what it's like to be born a woman, or to be born and have society treat you as though you were a woman. My point is, I don't believe that this is falsifiable. This question sounds unfalsifiable. How do you quantify ease, and how do you test which is easier than the other?
I started to walk over just thinking inherently the privileges that men in this society have.
Like, you still haven't described any privileges that men in society have, so I'm waiting on that.
And how they're able to navigate far easier. And
again, how do you know they're able to navigate far easier? Homeless men would like to have a word with you.
And all of that stuff. And then I thought what it would be like to be a black man in this society. And I don't know that it would be any easier.
And how did you arrive at that conclusion? What was your line of reasoning? What's the logic here? Because all I'm getting is conclusions. I'm not getting any sort of premises, line of reasoning that leads up to anything. It's just, I thought a thing and therefore I thought the thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to take from this. What's the takeaway from that sentence? That black men have it equally as difficult as black women? What does it mean to have it difficult, and how do you know who has it more or less difficult?
I'm first generation Mexican American. I have 2 Mexican parents. If I were to be born a male Mexican, it'd be so much easier for just that group.
And you know this how? Again, what do you mean by easier, and how do you know?
I try to break off from those stereotypes of Melanie gets a table ready for dinner. Excuse me, I have 2 brothers that can do the exact same thing. You know, why can't they do it? Why do I have to do it?
At no point in that elongated anecdote did you mention that it had anything to do with gender. You assumed that they were asking you to set the table because you were a woman, but no one said, Melanie, you're a woman, therefore you have to set the table. They just said, Melanie, set the table. And you assumed that you were being made to do that because you were a woman. This is the problem with anecdotes. That is your personal perception of those events. I can neither verify nor, I can neither verify or not verify that event. I can't tell if that actually is the case or that isn't the case. All I know is that's how you see it, which is fine, but that doesn't do much for someone trying to discover the truth on a larger scale rather than interpersonal events. How am I supposed to know if they wanted you to set the table because you were a woman and that's a woman's place, or if they just wanted you to set the table because you were there and your brothers were doing some other random stuff? I don't know these things. You don't explain these things. So how am I supposed to know these things? Furthermore, you asked a lot of questions that it sounds like you didn't get the answer to, or you at least didn't share the answer with the rest of the class. And having questions is not an invalidation of an opposite position. Just because you don't know why you were made to do certain things doesn't mean, therefore, insert random conclusion here.
My name is Melanie Valdez, and I am on the feminist side. I had an incident where I was sexually assaulted, and that changed my whole perspective.
This is a very delicate situation, so I'm going to try to handle it very delicately. Assuming that this assault did happen as you described, that is traumatic, that is horrible, and that person or persons involved in this incident should be buried underneath the prison. Not near me, because I'm in hell, but, just underneath the prison, underneath the concrete. That being said, your political position should not be informed by the incidences that do or do not happen to you, and you should recognize that that is not a strong intellectual position, even if it feels that way emotionally. A lot of people have a lot of experiences and come to completely opposite conclusions to you. So again, as a neutral party watching this video, you had an assault and someone else may have had an assault, and you two arrived at 2 different conclusions. How am I supposed to know who to believe?
If I was born any other thing than I am, I would have to struggle differently than I have already struggled, and compared to some people in minorities, or some people that are white have struggled more than me. There's always a positive and a negative that you're born with, and it's.
This sounds intuitive, and this sounds satisfying if it satisfies a preconceived notion, but this is not something that you've actually demonstrated. How do you know that if you were born any other thing that you would have to struggle any differently? Because there are siblings that are born differently and have the exact same struggles because they're in the exact same household. Or do they not? Again, I don't know, and you don't explain, so I don't know how I'm supposed to know. And I feel like that's a running theme of this stream so far.
It's how you utilize that and get over it that I think is important, rather than focusing on if I was born this or if I was born that.
I think it is kind of what we make of it. And I'd almost say that to want to be anything different than what we are is possibly even defeating the purpose of the feminist movement. A big part of feminism is telling women that they're worth it already. That they're already enough. I have a little sister. I have friends who were told by their father, by their older brother, that you are enough. And now they're doing whatever they want because they were told they could. They were given the opportunity from the beginning, and
I feel the need to interject here. Being told that you can do something is not the same as being given the opportunity. Those are two entirely different things. I can tell you can do a lot of stuff. That doesn't automatically give you the ability to do said things. And I feel that's important because I don't necessarily believe that this external source of validation should be something that is encouraged. Not saying that it's bad to encourage people to do stuff, but we also need to teach people to encourage themselves. It's not like you can't do something unless someone tells you you can. You can't be anything you want to be unless you were raised being told that you could. No, you can just be anything that you want to be. That should be the message. Not only if you were told growing up. It should just be you can do whatever you want, rather than only if you were told when you were growing up you can do whatever you want.
Weren't told, well, if you were a man you could. No. They were told you are a woman and you can because of who you are.
Not sure that having a community that affirms who you are is enough.
A community that affirms who you are. What does that mean in this context? Genuinely, I am perplexed and flummoxed and flabbergasted. I genuinely don't know what that means to say a community that affirms who you are, because woman is not who you are. You are your name, your experiences, the choices that you have made. If someone walked up to you and addressed you as woman, you presumably would feel offended and wouldn't respond to that, because that's not actually who you are, unless your name is actually woman.
If the society and the laws and the policies that govern tell you otherwise.
Okay, which society, laws, structures, and which society, laws, structures that govern your life tell you otherwise? Can you give us an example?
My parents told me I could do whatever I want to do. And so I went to law school, and I'm an attorney, and I write, but I don't make as much as my coworker who does the exact
You do not get to make the assessment about who deserves what. You might think that you do, but you don't. Everybody, presumably, thinks they deserve the best. They deserve the most amount of money. They work harder than anyone else, so they should be the top dog. I could run this place better than my supervisor. I work harder than everyone else. I'm absolutely the best. And that's fine and dandy for you to say, but that doesn't really mean anything. Just because you think you deserve more and aren't being paid more doesn't mean that you actually deserve more and aren't being paid more. Just because you don't make as much as your male coworker, which I'm very curious how you know how much that male coworker makes, just because you don't make as much as they do doesn't necessarily mean that that is because of minority status or anything like that. It could be because they have more qualifications than you. It could be because despite the fact that you technically do the same work, they might do more in terms of the amount of work, or the quality of their work might be better. Even if you're technically doing the same thing, that doesn't mean that you're doing it better than they are, and it doesn't mean that they're doing it better than you are. There's a lot of nuances that go into pay and what decides who gets paid how much. And it is not as simple as male, female, difference, gender. It's not that simple to just say, well, if I'm getting paid less than someone else and I have a different gender or race or demographic, that it must therefore be because of that different race, demographic, or whatever have you. Again, we go back to the bus example. Just because you went to the bus stop and the bus showed up does not mean the bus showed up because you went to the bus stop. The bus would have showed up even if you hadn't been there. You cannot just assume one discrepancy is responsible for all of the other discrepancies.
From the statistics that I read, there was
Statistics that you read where? Because as soon as someone says something like that, immediately skepticism alarm should go off. Where did you read these statistics and where did you get them from? And how do you know that these statistics are valid or not? I'm not convinced that any statistics you get from anywhere are all equally valid, and I haven't demonstrated why yours are any more valid than any others. So
wage gap, it was an earnings
So
gap.
it's general. You're understanding that there is no wage gap between men and women.
Yes,
and
there's an
that
earning gap. Different positions, different schooling can also be a factor. You can have the same degree but from two different schools, and they'll pay someone with a better school different. How the interviews go, even negotiable, entry salaries.
Why then are women choosing jobs that pay less?
does it matter why they're choosing jobs that pay less? Because I'm not convinced that it does. This sounds like an irrelevant question by someone who just doesn't approve of someone's lifestyle. You wouldn't ask why someone who you would ask why men go into higher paying fields, or you wouldn't ask they went into each individual field that they went into, because you'll get a myriad of answers. At the end of the day, why they made the decisions they made is on them, because at the end of the day, they made the decisions. So I don't think this is elaborating at this point. But the point that I'm trying to ham-fistedly make in summary is I don't think that it's a valid point to question why someone does what they do. You can very well ask me, why do I make the videos that I make and why do I produce the content that I produce? But that doesn't make my content any more or less valid. And that doesn't mean that I'm being pressured into doing something. So I don't see the point in bringing this up. Maybe, just maybe, they chose these things because you. Maybe.
Culture.
I disagree with that. Or rather, let me rephrase that. I don't know what that means when you just say culture. How do you know culture is what makes women choose what they do rather than they just choose what they do based on what they want? How do you decide what determines women's or men's or anyone's choices? It's very hard to do that with a diverse set like women, who are all different individuals who have different goals, hopes, dreams, fears, all that stuff. And to say that they all make their decisions based on culture means what exactly? And you know this how exactly? And what is culture if not the behaviors of individuals, the behaviors of citizens? How is it that cultures determine behaviors if the cultures themselves are the behaviors of the individuals? Or maybe you're just operating on a different definition of culture and you lost me. Just like I probably lost my audience right now. Oh, wait. Let me check chat. I've been going on for a minute. I haven't checked chat. Okay, chat's still good. So we're going to keep going.
Men and women need to work together to create equality.
That depends entirely on the definition of equality. So again, I'm going to wait until people provide a definition and then we'll go from there.
I think one of the reasons that I can take issue with certain types of feminism is it does come across as anti-man sometimes. It comes across as it's your fault. You know, if I go to the Women's March and I see signs that say smash the patriarchy and like our P word bites back and stuff like that, that's as much as that's speaking against, an oppressive top culture.
Is it speaking against an oppressive top culture? I mean, you say that it is, but what does our P word bites back have to do with an oppressive top culture? What does that even have to do with men? Do you see how these things aren't as inherently connected as you might see them to be?
That's speaking to all men.
Again, is it? Saying smash the patriarchy and our P word bites back, what do those things have to do with men? You have to draw a connection between these two things. You haven't even defined what a patriarchy is, let alone how it affects men. So why would anyone watching this believe you? Why would anyone listening to you believe you, rather?
And I don't see that as helpful.
Well, I think all men benefit from patriarchy.
It sure would be nice if you would define what patriarchy is, but I guess we're just not going to do that. Okay. Why do you think that? Why do you think all men benefit from patriarchy? And if, in fact, all men do benefit from patriarchy and still, on occasion, end up homeless and killing themselves, is the benefit really a benefit? Is it that substantial? Is it worth it if they can still end up homeless and still end up suicidal, suffering from mental health, suffering from diseases, dead, or any number of other negative things? What kind of benefit allows you to be homeless? Is it really even a substantial benefit at that point?
I mean, you need to acknowledge your privilege first.
And there goes the meme. You need to acknowledge your privilege. Well, I can only acknowledge a privilege that's been demonstrated to me. I can't acknowledge something that hasn't been proven or hasn't been demonstrated or hasn't been substantiated. So you can jolly well say, I need to acknowledge my privilege, and I can jolly well say that you need to acknowledge that you're wrong. That doesn't demonstrate that you're wrong, that doesn't prove that you're wrong, and that doesn't make it any easier for you to acknowledge that you're wrong if I'm not going to bother to explain how in fact it is that you are wrong. The same goes with privilege. If you want to convince anyone that they have any particular privilege, you kind of have to demonstrate that first and then address the main issue. You can't just say, acknowledge your privilege and then we'll go from there. Agree with me first and then we'll go from there. No, you have to demonstrate your point so that I can then decide if you're correct or incorrect, and then we can go from there. Otherwise, you're just another person on the internet saying agree with me.
If people could hear that about themselves and not be defensive.
What do you mean by defensive? Because in this context, I can't tell the difference between someone being defensive and someone just not believing you. Which, not believing you when you don't demonstrate what you mean or how you know things seems completely valid to me.
I think that we could probably push the needle forward a lot faster.
Forward being where and how fast? I'm not convinced. You haven't outlined what the goal is. You haven't outlined where the needle is supposed to be heading. So I'm not convinced that pushing the needle forward faster is necessarily a good thing, because we might not have the same goals. We might not be trying to push the needle to the same place. So perhaps you're right that this might help achieve your goals faster, but what are your goals? How do I know your goals are worth achieving? What about my goals? What about pushing the needle in a direction that I want to push the needle in faster?
Something that plagues the feminist movement is that there's this idea that in order to gain equal footing, the other side has to be emasculated or has to be dropped down.
And it's
the way that my understanding is with the different variations of feminism, there are variations of feminism that do in fact have beliefs similar to this. A primary example would be a trans-exclusionary radical feminist, someone who is in favor of feminism for women, but just not trans women. Hold on one second. Okay. Yeah, someone who is in favor of equal rights for women, but not if you're a trans woman. If you're a trans woman, then you're actually a man and you're part of the problem and you're trying to infiltrate women and a whole bunch of nonsense that you can hear from TERFs. But the point is that a TERF would be an example of something that this guy is talking about, someone who is actively fighting against a member of the population in order to achieve what they believe is equality. They are genuinely trying to dismiss, trans women from being women because they're actually men. And that is attacking or detrimental to men as much as it is to the actual trans women themselves.
This isn't pie, you know what I mean? Just because I get a slice doesn't mean you get
you
get less,
absolutely.
right?
I'm not convinced that that's not the case. You might want to double check that. We have a finite amount of resources to go around. It's not like there's an unlimited amount of everything everywhere. There's a very limited amount of resources, and how those resources are divvied up matters. So yes, if 1% of the population owns 90-something% of the wealth, that doesn't leave a lot for everyone else to have. So no, I don't believe that your analogy works. And that's under the hypothetical situation that there is or is not a finite or infinite amount of wealth or resources, which you haven't demonstrated. You can say that there's unlimited resources, and you getting some resources doesn't take away from me, but that doesn't prove that getting resources doesn't take away from me.
Advocating for women's rights doesn't infringe upon men's rights.
That depends on how you advocate for women's rights. Because again, if you advocate for women's rights in such a ways that they exclude a certain demographic, then they actually do infringe on some other people's rights. So it depends on how you advocate women's rights. Just because you advocate for women's rights doesn't mean that you're advocating for women's rights in a way that isn't exclusionary or doesn't infringe on people's rights. You can very much be a bad advocate, or an advocate that is harming other individuals.
Right. First and second wave feminism were very clear in the very particular things that they were trying to accomplish. You had first wave feminism, which was very clearly trying to get the right to vote. Second wave feminism, right after World War II and such, helping women progress in the workplace and such. And now I see third wave feminism, and it is a broken apart, can be lost movement that goes in so many directions and has so many extra qualifiers. And I think about, I was talking to one of my friends who went to the Women's March with a pro-life feminist group. And she said on multiple accounts they were asked to leave because that's not why the Women's March was happening, and that they were against the movement. And so you have all these different types of feminism. There doesn't seem to be a clear center and a clear desire, and I hear people call themselves feminists for all different reasons. And with some of them, I would agree, and I would call myself a feminist for those reasons. But because it's so all over the place, I just can't call myself a feminist.
Now, putting aside the whole anecdote about his friend and the march thing, because again, if I treat his anecdote with weight, then I have to treat every single anecdote with weight and believe all of them. So we're going to have to just take that in our brains, put it over there, throw it to the side. Putting that aside, as far as the main issue is concerned with feminism and there being different types of feminism, and there being different sorts of variations, variants, broken, split apart, all that, in my opinion, that is functionally indistinct from anything. Nothing is 100% one whole thing. America is broken. Feminism is broken. Politics are broken. Liberalism is broken. Conservatism is broken. There is not one thing that you will find that has one unified center message. Everything, pretty much, that is an intellectual position you can think of has variations and variants and splits and schisms and disagreements and different things like that. The point is, feminism is by no means special in this regard. And if you are going to not be a feminist on the grounds that there are too many broken splits and variations, you will have to apply that consistently, and you basically can't adopt any label because there are too many variations and broken schisms and splits. And I don't think that that's necessarily how most people function. But I might be wrong. That might be how this guy functions. I don't know.
If feminists can make a concise push towards one issue together, would I be willing to join? If I agreed with the point, yes.
No. I do not particularly agree to join any movement based on the point. I might focus on the point along with those individuals, but I am not going to change my position because they have one point that I agree with. So if conservatives, for some reason, decided that religion didn't make sense, and this is just going off the deep end, hypothetical example, but let's just say they decided religion didn't make sense, I agree in that sense that a lot of religious ideas that I've come across do not make sense to me personally. It doesn't mean I'm going to be a conservative because of that. I might agree with certain conservatives that have that idea, but that does not mean that I will adopt the label of conservatism or that I will support conservatism now. Having one good idea that I agree with does not mean that the entire movement is worthy of my support. And I can really focus on the issue rather than the movements against the issue, because I think the issue is more important than the movements against the issue. I think it's far more important to focus on the cure for cancer than focus on which organizations are supporting the cure for cancer.
If I agreed with what the movement was going for, yes.
As a woman, I'm not sure that I'm concerned whether or not you want to join as a man.
As a man. So if he was a woman, would your perspective be different? Are you deciding whether or not you care about him joining based on whether or not he is or is not a man? Because that's the impression that one could get from your manner of speech here.
Is that not part of the issue?
But that's segregating that's segregating genders. If you're saying that you don't care about my opinion as a man, that goes against everything the feminist movement
I don't care
goes.
about reshaping and forming my feminism in a way that is digestible for you as a man.
Okay, so you don't care about effective communication. You don't care about putting across your messages and your ideas in a way that other people who disagree with you can understand. That's fine. That's your prerogative if you don't care about being understood. But because of the as a man part, it really gives the impression that you don't care about effectively communicating with men specifically because they are men, because that seems to be the primary factor that you highlighted and didn't list any other reasons as to why you don't care about effective communication. So why is it that you don't care about reshaping your feminism to make it more digestible for men, but based on the way you phrase that, you do care about reshaping it in a way that is digestible for women? Or do you not care about reshaping it in a way that's digestible for anybody and everybody can just, go, and you care about effectively communicating with anyone? Which side of the fence are you on?
So what's the current one message?
The definition of feminism across the board is the...
Whoa. I have to stop you right there. I have to stop you right there. Across the board. The definition of feminism across the board. Across what board? What board are you referring to? Genuinely, earnestly, honestly, we just went over the idea that feminism has all these different variations and schisms and breaks into it. So what across the board are you talking about?
So what's the current one message?
The definition of feminism across the board is the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes.
Yes.
And as I outlined earlier, for various reasons that I outlined earlier, I disagree with the social and economic equality because I'm not convinced that those are inherently good things. If women make more money than men, I don't think that's a bad thing that we need to adjust for. And if men treat women meanly or women treat men meanly, I'm not necessarily convinced that that's something that needs to be adjusted for because that's a byproduct of freedom. So I'm not convinced either of those are problems. The only one I agree with is the political equality of the sexes, that being legal protection under the law and having the same equality of opportunity under the law.
Why are we only talking about the female inequalities? Why aren't we talking about the male inequalities?
We do not.
Just to point out before they respond, there are people that do talk about the male inequalities. I'm not convinced that only feminists only focus on exclusively female issues and that there aren't feminists that focus on male issues. So I don't think that's a justified assumption either.
Not have the same experience.
Whether you have the same experience is not relevant to the point that he was making. The point that he was making is, why don't we address everyone's issues? And your response to why don't we address everyone's issues is, we don't have the same issues. How is that a valid response?
You are not oppressed in the same ways that I am.
I'm not convinced that either of you are oppressed, and you've not demonstrated that either of you are oppressed, but you expect both him and me to believe you? Again, this is a running theme of the video. People have the tendency to just say things. Feminism, patriarchy, different things without explaining what these things are, and then assuming positions based on these terms that they have not yet defined, leaving the audience if they're skeptical, without any metric to decide who's right and who's wrong, or who's more reasonable and who's less reasonable. And there's an ad coming in 5 seconds, because of course there is.
No, and I'm sure you're not oppressed in the same ways that I am.
So I'm completely deaf. I don't.
Again, I really want to know how they decided who was oppressed in what ways, and who has the different kinds of oppression, and what oppression even means in this context. There's so many questions that could be asked.
More of our world leaders should be women.
No, more of our world leaders should be competent. More of our world leaders should be qualified. More of our world leaders should be better. And I don't see women as synonymous for more qualified, more competent, or better. So no, I do not agree with that statement.
Let's talk about for like this, like abortion.
Okay, I mean, I thought we were talking about world leaders, not specific policies, but okay, I guess they're basically the same thing.
Those who signed the bill in the room with Trump.
What bill? Are you going to explain what bill specifically you're talking about, or are you just going to say bill? This is the problem. How many times am I going to have to stop someone in this video and tell them that you didn't explain what you're talking about?
They were all white men.
Okay, and had they been all brown women, would that have made the decision better if it was the exact same decision? Again, this seems to be picking out an arbitrary factor and calling that problematic instead of the actual core issue that is problematic. Based on what you said, the implication is that the bill isn't the problem. The problem is they were all men, and had they not all been white men, then the exact same bill would have been better. Again, if those same white men had voted on a bill you wanted and you agreed with and you supported, would you still have a problem with it based purely on the fact that they were white men? And if so, how is that not discriminatory?
I did not see a single woman.
So, you didn't see a single woman, therefore what? You don't think women supported this mystery bill that you haven't described? If you think there was not a single woman that supported this mystery bill you haven't described, then I have some serious questions for you. There are women that disagree about pretty much everything because there are humans that disagree about pretty much everything. So to tell me I personally didn't see a woman there doesn't mean that there weren't women that supported it.
It just doesn't matter if it's a white woman. I did not see a single woman in there.
Why does it matter if it's a white man? You said it doesn't matter if it's a white woman. Why does it matter if it's a white man? Do you see the problem? You're getting awfully close into discriminatory territory if you're not giving me any good reason as to why it's problematic to have white men do things.
So those men are making choices for us.
Those elected officials, I might add. And I'm not saying I necessarily agree with the way elections go, but those are elected officials. Those are people that were voted and put in the positions that they were put into. They did not just show up there. They were not just born male and inherited their jobs or their roles. People voted and said they wanted these people in these particular political positions to support this bill. Again, you are drastically oversimplifying the issue to just be men rather than what the actual problem would be, which is the bill. Or is the bill not the actual problem to you?
Women about birth control, abortion, healthcare, everything, and
they are not making the decisions for you because, again, they are elected officials. This is not to mention the fact that constitutionality of laws is challenged on a regular basis. A slow and painstaking basis, but they are challenged anyway. How many homosexual individuals do you think were in political positions of power when gay marriage was legalized? Do you see the point? You don't need gay people in political positions of power in order to achieve some sort of equality or representation of ideas or whatever. Gay people didn't need to be in positions of political power in order to make political change. So I don't see why this would be any different with women. This idea that they're making decisions for you doesn't seem relevant to me, because if they're making decisions for you, but you elected them to be in those positions to make decisions for you, that's the way our system works. If you have a problem with people making decisions for you, you have a problem with the American, air quotes, democratic system. You do not have a problem with white men. It's not about white men. It's about people making decisions on your behalf. And if that's the route you want to take, argue for that.
We can't even have a say on it because they won't even hear us.
And how do you know they don't hear you? Just because they don't agree with you, or just because they didn't make the decision that you made? Does that automatically mean they didn't hear you? Again, the way our system is set up is that people make decisions for the vast majority of the population through elections. If you have a problem with that, that's fine, but that's not relevant to the main issue that we're talking about.
I don't view it as we should have more women in office. I view it as we should have the most qualified people in office.
Yes, I agree with this. That's probably the only time you'll hear me say this throughout this stream, but yes, that is a statement that I agree with. Also, I'm checking chat now. MathPig made it home about 9 minutes ago. Gonna have a live reaction to Turf Wars. Everyone look forward, all 2 of you watching this stream, look forward to the Turf Wars on MathPig's channel. So I don't have subscribers, but the few I have, I'm trying to send your way. Anyway, back to the content. Yes, I agree with this man. The primary focus should be on meritocracy and having the most qualified individuals as our leaders, rather than the ones that have arbitrary features that have nothing to do with how successful they are or will not be. Or do you think that being a woman would make you a better political leader than a man? Because those are the only 2 options. You either think being a woman makes you more qualified, or you don't care about who's qualified. But you can't have it both ways.
If you have an issue with, the bill being signed by white men, I believe that voting for Congress people that are women, or whoever you review and believe are the most qualified, will put those people in power.
Yes. Now, there are still problems with that I have, but that is something I will save for a whole separate video. Aren't I a tease?
If we are talking about the last election, I believe that the most qualified candidate did not win.
Bully for you. But that doesn't matter. This is not about who you think is the most qualified candidate. This is about who is the most qualified candidate. And if you can't make a distinction between who you think is the most qualified and who is the most qualified, that is rather, I know MathPig might get mad at me, but pig-headed. You are not taking into consideration how this might affect anyone else but you. You think you have the supreme judgment, and anyone who is not what you would consider qualified is not qualified because you don't think they're qualified. Why do you think that the most qualified individual did not win? Why do you think that, presuming based on the date, this being May 6, 2018, this video being made, I can only assume this is talking about the election referring to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So presuming based on what you said, you think that Hillary Clinton was the more qualified of the 2 individuals. Why? And why do you think she did not win?
People need to really consider what role gender played in that.
I'm not convinced that gender played any role in that, and you have not demonstrated that gender played any role in that. Why would anyone make that assumption? Why would anyone bring gender into this? And why would anyone consider what role gender had to be in that when you haven't brought that up? This seems like a random thing. This seems like what I've been talking about this entire video. You have a man and a woman. The man wins, the woman loses. Therefore, we have to think about the gender because that's the primary factor. But why do you think that's the primary factor?
Just logically, the people that they're representing are both men and women, so the people representing us should be men and women.
That does not logically follow. Do you think that every single demographic needs to have every single demographic representing them? Do you think that, well, population of, multi-sexual oriented individuals, so we need to have multi-sexual oriented individuals in the political office? We have people who have vast different disabilities, so we need people in office that have vast different disabilities. Do you see how this doesn't make sense? One's ability to have the same arbitrary characteristics that you have does not necessarily make them better or less of a leader. Just because men and women exist doesn't mean that we need to have male and female leaders. We need to have the most qualified leaders. You are, based on the manner that you're speaking, disregarding qualifications, and you couldn't give a shit about who's most qualified. All you care about is, we have men and women here, we need men and women there. Screw qualifications, screw who's actually good for the job, screw who's going to make the best decisions based on their experience. No, all that matters is men and women, men and women. And if you don't think that's problematic, I genuinely want to know why.
And it's hard for me to ever understand why people wouldn't think that there should be more women in leadership.
Well, it's very simple. More women in leadership does not necessarily equal better leadership. Therefore, the two aren't inherently connected. Therefore, why would you advocate for one? If you care about having the most qualified individuals in leadership positions, why would you care whether or not they were men or women?
I love women. I love being a woman. I love strong women. I was raised by strong women.
Good for you.
I don't agree with all of the things that are traditionally included in feminist beliefs. Like, I have a different view on abortion than you guys.
You don't know what their view on abortion is because they never said what their view on abortion was. Just so we're clear.
So that's a big deal for me. That's one of the most important things to me. I'm a Christian, and that's just one of my beliefs. So that's kind of, for me, that's one of the driving forces why I don't identify as a feminist.
So you don't identify as a feminist because you disagree with some feminist ideas. I guess that's fair, but unless you wholeheartedly agree with all of the Christian ideas, I think you're going to run into a similar problem there.
To divide into two teams gender-wise is not Spartan. It's not often what we do, but it
Not Spartan. What does being Spartan have to do with this?
is sometimes. And how do we avoid that? And how do we avoid that separation? How do we make it a collective effort, even though I'm a conservative white man? And, there are different views than me, and I don't want to force you to agree with me. I don't want to change your mind in that way, but I want to see how I can still work with you fully and be on your team, and you can be on mine as we disagree agreeably.
This sounds really, really nice and wholesome, and like he's trying to bring everyone together. The problem with this is that not everyone has the same goals. Those disagreements are on what goals to achieve, and as long as that's the case, I'm not convinced that you're going to be able to work out your differences and achieve progress. If you have a different definition of equality than a feminist does, you two are not going to be able to work together to achieve that same goal because you actually have two separate goals. So while this sounds very nice, I'm not sure it's practical. Not saying it's impractical necessarily, I just don't understand how people with different goals can work together to achieve those completely different and sometimes contradictory goals.
Thank you, everyone, for probably the most respectful middle ground I've ever seen.
I would take issue with that. I think when she said she didn't care about his opinions as a man, I would call that not necessarily respectful, but okay.
Hey guys.
And that's the end of that. So that's pretty much all I had to say on all of the issues, pretty much. I've come back to the chat, and mystery abortion bill more likely supported than evangelicals by MathBig. Again, I really want to know which bill specifically they're talking about. It would be nice when people say things if they could clarify what they mean rather than just saying this bill, because that doesn't do me any good. How do I do research on the bill? And how do I do research on whether the bill was good or bad? And what does the fact that white men pushed the bill or were in the room when the bill was signed, what does that have to do with how good or bad the bill actually is? These are the kinds of questions that I wish I could have been there to actually ask in person to see what they would have said. I don't ask gotcha questions here. Any question I ask, I genuinely want an answer to. I just noticed the typo by MathBig. He said supported my evangelicals. I didn't know MathBig had evangelicals. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say. I'm very curious to see what you guys think in the comments. But just in general, those are a few of my brief thoughts on some social issues. No one has defined what patriarchy is, so I have no position on that. No one has defined privilege, so I have no position on that. Or demonstrated privilege, so I don't have any position on that. And I don't identify with the feminists because I only agree with the political equality of the sexes and not the social and economic equality of the sexes. So, yeah. That's pretty much it. That's all I got for you guys. Make sure you guys head over to MathPig's channel later for the how did I forget that fast? What's wrong with me? For the turf wars. Oh, that's going to be amazing. So yeah, make sure you guys couple around. Until then, remember, I appreciate you all a lot.